You've gone full Sean Bean, man. Sorry, you're not coming back.
Never go full Sean Bean. I mean, especially in Westeros. The new season's opener finally brings us the action we've been waiting for, with a naval clash for the ages. High stakes, high seas, high treason. This season's opener has everything. This is the Battle of the Gullet, and it is every bit as spectacular as we could have hoped. All pirate battles and flaming missiles and hand-to-hand combat. It's surrounded by the sort of scheming, seduction, confession, and devastation that makes for good character drama too. If the rest of the season is anything like this Game of Thrones spin-off might finally have a way to outfight its predecessor. We'll come back to the character stuff. The centrepiece of this episode is a hugely exciting air and navy clash between Lord Corlys Velaryon's fleet and the Tyroshi fleet led by Helen O'Hara. For Lahar, it's a grudge match. For Corlys, it's only part of his blockade of King's Landing on behalf of Rhaenyra and her Blacks in the civil war called the Dance of Dragons against her cousins, the Greens. Lohar's determined to hit the sea snake where it hurts, sending half her fleet to burn his home.
Lord Corlys's castle. We will require the full strength of your fleet if we have any hope.
High Tide is a monument to the sea snake himself. Do you think his focus will hold when he sees his treasure room aflame?
She's right. It's another devastating blow to a man who has already lost a wife and 2 children. Happily, he's also a badass. He lures Lohar away from the fleet, sinks 2 of her companion sheets thanks to some fancy pants sailing through a narrow channel, and then fights hand-to-hand against the ferocious Tyroshi captain. Abigail Thorne is great as Lohar here, absolutely convincing as a leader of men and a serious threat to Corlys. She's already come close to taking down a dragon before getting to this personal vendetta. Given that Corlys begins the episode having a moving heart-to-heart with his formidable illegitimate son Alan, and that he earns Alan's respect as a sailor and a captain during the battle, you have to wonder if he'll survive this fight. He's missing at the end of the episode. If this is how he goes out, fair play. It's an exceptionally well-shot, almost entirely practical battle. The ship tanks and sets were so massive at Leavesden Studios that they overshadowed the new Harry Potter's Privet Drive. The battle in the air, however, goes less well. Yes, Prince Jaehaerys and Baela ride into the fight and decimate the Tyroshi fleet. Jace's dragon Vermax is almost taken down by Lohar early on, and then Rhaena joins the battle to devastating effect. In this episode, we see that she's finally wooed a dragon of her own, but in one of those rabbit-foot scenarios, her half-feral beast refuses to obey her and attacks friends and foe alike in the heat of the moment. Her attempts to help contribute to the battle's biggest loss, as Vermax is harpooned in the chest and drags Jace into the drink with him. It is a devastating finale. On the bright side, at least it saves Rhaenyra from having to confront her son's high treason. The reason she's not there on her own dragon is because he locked her in her room for her own protection. She's been on a high this episode, convinced by Alicent's offer to surrender King's Landing and confident in her new dragon riders, who are waiting grumpily near Harrenhal to ambush awful Aemond and his massive dragon Vhagar. So oversized, what is he compensating for? Of course, this follows 2 seasons of dithering on Rhaenyra's part, so you can understand why her team aren't so convinced. It's a bit late for her to start quoting Elizabeth I now. Rhaenyra's line,
"I may appear to have the weak and feeble body of a woman, but I possess the heart and spirit of a king,"
is a historical lift from a speech that also preceded a major naval encounter. Anyway, she sends her husband Daemon, who's just destroyed a green-aligned Lannister army at Red Fork with the help of the Riverlords, and enjoying the blood-splattered look. The late-arriving Starks bring Daemon the head of Lord Jason Lannister, while his fully armoured twin Tyland tries to keep control of his Tyroshi allies on the Gullet. So much for one green army. But the spoiled and rather prissy Ormond Hightower has another on the way, including the dragon Tessarion. Oh, and Sir Criston Cole is out there with his forces alongside Sir Gawain Hightower, who's increasingly horrified by Cole's nihilism and his lack of control of his thuggish men. That is a lot of potential fighting men still on the board. Then there are the main members of the Green Royal family. Alicent is horrified on her return to King's Landing to find Aegon missing and Aemond all too present, when she had promised Rhaenyra precisely the opposite. Aegon's run for it is interrupted by Rhaenyra's troops and Lord Larys's scheming, unbeknownst to his mother, but it takes all of Alicent's considerable powers of persuasion and a hint of something closer to seduction on Aemond's part, to send her son off to Harrenhal and clear the way for the deal she has made. As for that kiss he gives her, we needed something to really turn the stomach this episode, right? In summary, we've got dragons in action, ships burning and sinking and firing, armies clashing, Larys and Aemond and Aegon and Cole being awful, and Alan and Corlys and Daemon being badass. If the show were always like this, it wouldn't just match Game of Thrones, it would outshine all but a handful of episodes. 2 years ago, rounding up season 2, I speculated that showrunner Ryan Condal had held back on the action last season to build a war chest for this time. I thought I was joking, but this episode makes me wonder. If this signals the path for season 3, it is going to be a feast.
You'll all join me as I sit the driftwood throne and dine on the sea snake's ears!
Last season was talky to a fault, but this feels like the show we hoped to see all along. Thrillingly dramatic, action-packed, and full of Targaryens causing chaos in Westeros. Dragons fill the skies and ships fill the seas, and every one of them aims to cause maximum destruction to the other side. That's obviously very sad for the people involved, sorry that happened or whatever, but it's bloody great as a viewer. Score 10 out of 10. Pirates, dragons, ships, fire, betrayal, chaos, death and destruction. It's honestly hard to imagine what more you could ask of a season opener.
Hey everybody, that is IGN's review of House of the Dragons Season 3 premiere, and joining me to talk about the 10 she just gave it, Helen O'Hara. How's it going, Helen?
I'm good, how are you?
I'm good. First of all, thank you for taking on House of the Dragon for us. This show is a real one, right? Like it's a rangy show that sort of requires, knowing some of Game of Thrones, some of the books, but also it stands on its own pretty well. So before we get too into the weeds with this episode and your review of it, I guess to just bluntly ask it, what kind of Game of Thrones fan are you?
I'm an old school Game of Thrones fan, I guess. I think I read the first book in not quite very first publication. It was probably like 2003, I think, but pretty early, certainly before the show. So I was there very excited when the show was being made. And I think like everyone else, I thought the last 2 seasons were less good. But I do feel like this is my grand unified theory of Game of Thrones. Do you want to hear it?
Yes, please.
Okay, so I think as soon as you start trying to bring that show to an ending, it stopped feeling like Game of Thrones. And I think even if they'd had more time to develop some of the stuff that they were trying to do, I don't know that they could have dealt with that. Because I think the whole show was about somebody making a plan and then something they didn't foresee would turn up and knock their plans for a loop. But you have to stop doing that if you're trying to get to a conclusion. And as soon as you stop doing that, it stops feeling like Game of Thrones. So I think they were always going to have trouble. And I wonder, I have other issues with House of the Dragon, but I wonder if the fact that because this is a history, because they can kind of choose their endpoint, maybe they can work around some of those issues. Maybe.
It puts me in mind of, was it Littlefinger's quote from There Is Only the Climb? Like the idea that it's just this nonstop thing. And then to the idea of making that stop is sort of counter to what the whole show is about.
There is a possibility that, through several years of essentially low-grade civil war in the Game of Thrones timeline, maybe everybody's exhausted, and you do get one of those periods of relative peace for Bran's, time as king. I don't know. But I think it's interesting seeing House of the Dragon, because here we have had that peaceful period. We have had a king who was, he was a bit of a, Egypt, but people liked him. He didn't do anything too terrible. Everybody kind of got on with their lives.
Life expectancy started to creep up a little bit.
Maybe too high for Westeros. So now we're bringing it down again. Yeah.
One of the lines from your review I enjoyed hearing you say was, if this was the whole series, if the whole series was as good as this episode, it would have outshined all but just a few episodes of Game of Thrones. So I guess the first question is, what do we think has been holding the show back from being this all the time?
First of all, the fact that they are going from a history book, right? And it's the history of Westeros. This book, if anybody out there hasn't read it, the book that this one's based on, or it's based on part of the book, is essentially a kind of faux historical chronicle of what's been happening for the several hundred years before Game of Thrones starts. From Aegon's conquest right up to, it will, he hasn't actually written the second volume yet because he's George R.R. Martin, but but the idea is that he's got a whole history of Westeros mapped out and that this is just part of that history. And that does mean that they're not very free to completely deviate from canon. There have been things that they have changed for the show. They're not being slavish to the book. There have been, as well as sort of adding things in that simply aren't discussed in the book, they're also, finding ways to maybe change certain things, to maybe combine characters to make it a little bit, believe it or not, there are fewer characters than there could be in this show. It seems impossible.
I believe it.
But they are changing a few things, but generally speaking, the sort of broad outline of the book they are kind of tied to, because that is the story of Westeros. And because of things like A Night of the Seven Kingdoms and other spin-offs that they're discussing, they can't hugely deviate from what's supposed to kind of happen. So that's kind of an interesting thing here. But I think the sort of slowdown of season 2, and it was slower. I think season 1 was a bit faster. It had some time jumps that people struggled with, including myself. But season 2 had stopped with the time jumps and still struggled with just telling this much story and moving all of these pieces into the right place. And I'm hoping now that we can just get to the good stuff. I hope.
It's an interesting dilemma for the show, because so much of, like you say, the broad strokes of this history are so dialed in the canon and in the text. But like within that, you can, who dies on which day and in which way and how emotionally resonant is that for the show? Like there's actually oddly a lot of freedom there in some ways, because I mean history is so dry sort of by its nature that you can kind of get away with a lot of that stuff.
Exactly. And we're seeing that they're making some characters more sympathetic or less sympathetic as they go. And I hope that will pay off dramatically. I'm slightly worried, and I wrote a piece that people, if they're not worried about spoilers, people can go back and read the piece I wrote at the end of season 2. But I do worry that some of making certain people more sympathetic or less sympathetic will mitigate at the end. Again, that will be a problem for the history that they are kind of tied into. And I hope they have a way through that. They seem smart, I'm hoping that they've got something figured out.
Is there some degree of excitement around this particular episode that is sort of more typically reserved for a finale rather than a premiere?
I'd love to know why this is the premiere and not the finale of last season. I think last season was 8 episodes, not the 10 episodes of season 1. So, maybe we could have had 9 and done this last time. I think that would have sent everybody away on a very, very high kind of a feeling. It's also just like, I think physically, the amount of time and preparation, physical set building that they put into this was, I think, off the chart. This one episode took months and months of planning. So I guess that might have been a reason for it.
And obviously, you're talking about things that have to be immediately dealt with. This episode obviously features a pretty major death, which is almost a requirement for a Game of Thrones show.
Yeah.
How does this one fare in terms of its placement right here in the premiere episode? Because sometimes these big deaths can feel a little gratuitous, and I think part of that is like the sputtering out of the last 2 seasons of Game of Thrones. Like it got to be a little bit like, come on, guys. And so there is a certain amount, this is maybe just me, there's a certain amount of eye rolling that comes with these big deaths in Game of Thrones. But how did this one land for you?
I was really struck the second time I watched it by just the timing of the death. So, yes, his dragon is taken down and you're sitting there thinking, oh my goodness, that's awful. He's lost his dragon. But, he manages to get the clasp of his harness loose and he swims for the surface and you're like, okay, things are still bad, but he's got to the surface. He's not drowning. He must be very upset, poor boy. And then boom, hit by an arrow. And then just in case you were wondering, boom, boom, hit by 2 more arrows, full Boromir style. I mean, they're not leaving anything to chance.
You've gone full Sean Bean, man. Sorry, you're not coming back.
Never go full Sean Bean. I mean, especially in Westeros. So yeah, I thought it was really well well laid out, well played as a piece of drama. Per Jace, though, I mean, he kind of never really got going.
As impactful deaths go, this was maybe a mid-tier?
It wasn't the Red Wedding, but it did hit, I think, like it needed to. I think the problem is that there are not that many characters yet in this show who would have that impact. I don't know if we've glommed onto some of them in the same way, because I think there is a difference fundamentally between the Targaryens and the Starks. The Starks were immediately a likable, loving, semi-normal family. I mean, okay, yes, the first episode has their dad teaching them how to execute a guy, but he's talking about recognizable a moral code that we somewhat respect. We may not understand it completely, but we kind of were with it. This royal family come from a completely different world, and they are far more bizarre to us than I think the Starks were in episode 1.
Do you think this is the season where we finally start to care about some of these characters in the sense that their deaths would move us more than poor Jace's?
There are certainly some characters here who I really care about. In this episode, I'm really worried for Corlys. Like, he's just had a heart-to-heart with his son. He might as well have shown him a picture of his sweetheart back home. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, it's the dangerous thing to do.
Yeah, it's a very dangerous thing to do right before a battle. So that seemed like a really worrying thing to set up. And I do care about Corlys, and not just because I keep wanging on about how great his wig is. I just think he's an awesome character. I think there are people here who have, who are clearly acting from a good place. I think Alicent, for all her ambition and all of her manipulation, loves her kids and is trying to do her best to, rescue at least some of her family. And she's quite clear-eyed about the fact that some of her family are psychos. And she is willing to sacrifice those ones if it will mean that she can, hold on to the rest. I think that's a really interesting place to be coming from. And that's a character that you can sort of get behind a little bit more at this point. Maybe not in earlier seasons. But this Alicent, I think, is someone who we can maybe recognize a little bit more. And then I think Rhaenyra, almost to a fault, is acting from often quite a good place. But she also has her moments of arrogance and temper and intransigence and everything else. So she's an interesting one. I'm not sure how things are going to go for her.
Helen, again, thank you so much for tackling House of the Dragon Season 3 for us. Really enjoyed this review. Looking forward to reading the rest of the reviews this season.
I think it's shaping up to be a good one.
And thank you for watching this review. Let us know what you think of it in the comments. And for more TV reviews, Dragon-related and otherwise, you're already here. Be sure to subscribe to IGN wherever you like to watch.